Okay, so I'm here in the privileged position with Professor Stephen Furnell, who's just given a great talk on spearfishing for our Big Data and Cybersecurity Conference. So Steve, what do you think is the main thing that we could implement to stop this rise in phishing?
Well, I don't think there's necessarily a single thing. As I concluded as part of the talk, what we really need is the combination of the technology that's available, but also not to forget the fact that we need some form of user education and awareness still. I mean, particularly in this context, one of the significant reasons that people get caught out is because they haven't got that insight, that skills, that sense of what looks right and wrong, what ought to look suspicious to them, but apparently doesn't in many cases.
Yeah. So how could we create a new generation of kids? So Kate Forbes said that we really need to create a generation where our kids actually know technology and understand how to create with it, and not just a whole lot of technology users. How do you think we could help schools to be able to improve that integration with digital technologies?
Well, I think ensuring that right from that point when the children are introduced to the technology, there's an element of, if you like, the cybersecurity literacy coming into play as part of what they're doing. So they're not just taught how to use it, but they're taught how to use it in a sense well. I mean, what Kate was actually suggesting was that some of them that she's spoken to actually did seem to be somewhat more clued up and more literate than perhaps the parents' generation or the teachers' generation. And to a degree, we've perhaps still got this middle generation that are caught there, where they've passed through education without being supported, and they're now out in the world using the technology without that backdrop of cyber sense, if you like, behind them.
Yeah. And if you were to give advice to teachers in a computer science class just now about how they would inspire kids, what advice would you give them?
Well, I think one thing is to be aware of the things that the children, the kids themselves are actually utilising. So what's hooked them into the technology? What bits of it are exciting them, inspiring them? Why do they pick up their smartphones, for example? What are they trying to use? And relating it from that. So rather than making it a dry, sort of almost corporate presentation about you need to protect this, it's all about confidentiality, integrity, that sort of stuff. Actually making it about, well, what data do you share? What do you do with that app? How do you use it? Why do you use it?
Yeah. As someone who's went through all the phases of seeing cybersecurity grow from datacomms, networking, into what we would call information security and into cybersecurity, do you think we have a problem in the word cybersecurity? It's just such a generalization.
Yes and no. I mean, I think one thing that we can say for it is that it's captured the imagination, it's captured attention in a way that info security, computer security, IT security didn't before. And so, you know, the discipline, if we want to call it that, has existed for decades, but never has it had more attention and more sort of prominence in the public mind than perhaps it's getting now. So we've now got a platform that we can build upon we've got people's attention, it's what we do with it.
Yeah. So one of my favourite things to do is to tour around your department and to see all the old computers. Tell me about your history. What hooked you? What did you like? What didn't you like? Where are you now with computers?
Well, I suppose, and as you've seen around my department with the stuff in the glass cabinets, what hooked me in was the early 80s microcomputing stuff. I started off with a Sinclair ZX Spectrum and learned how to do some programming, and that hooked me into going beyond the playing games with it, understanding how you would write the code, and that in its turn got me to study it more widely, and I've been there ever since, but as you've seen, still got all the past stuff kept on display. Yeah.
And do you think we're losing a little bit of our foundation and understanding how computers really work? I mean, from what I see, we're kind of going back to that with things like malware analysis. Do you think we've kind of lost our track a little bit because we're trying to cover too much? Would you like to see a day where we taught machine code and the inners of programs, or do you think that would switch off kids?
Well, I think for the right people, it will still be interesting. I mean, and we've gone back to certain things that are, if you like, some of the more basics with the Raspberry Pi generation, the microbit, all of this stuff getting introduced. But equally, many people aren't interested in how it works. They just want to use it and have the benefits from it. I think we still do need people who want to go beyond that for reasons such as malware analysis and reverse engineering, that sort of stuff. You need to understand the underlying bits, but it's not for everybody. And I think you need to find that balance of what is enough for, if you like, the general, if you like, computing user to understand about how it works and why, and then the different directions you can go off into, sort of how do you apply it and how do you get under the hood of it.
Okay, well, we're at a point where obviously we have built up an academic infrastructure. We have a certain pedagogy that we follow. We look at a Bloom's type taxonomy to develop, and we see our students progressing through to honours level and then on to MSc. But industry is crying out for people to come and work for them. So how are we going to create this balance between the practical nature of cybersecurity? I think there's no getting away from it, that it's the hands-on that often matters, against the academic study. What would you think would be the best balance between this practical hands-on approach against an academic type?
Well, I think even an academic program, you want to have and you need to have an element of practical hands-on within it, because otherwise people will go out knowing all the theory and not being able to apply it in any context. But against that backdrop, then I think there's different entry points. I mean, we've got, if you like, the traditional undergraduate degree route, which you can have a good level of coverage of the general computing background and principles and emphasising things around cyber security. But there's also things like degree apprenticeships now in the cyber space, and that gives an opportunity for people to go at it in a far more applied and practical way in the workplace and building up the capability that way.
Yeah. And so people in industry are typically looking at professional certification as their route to a job or career progression. Where do you see the balance in the future between professional certification and academic study? Is there a place for both? Can you integrate professional certification into your academic programs, or are they separate things?
Absolutely, there's a place for both, and yes, you can in some of the cases integrate the certification or the knowledge elements of it into the delivery of an academic program. But there's certain certifications, you know, some of the more prominent ones and the more established ones that you see, you know, being asked for in the adverts, that rely upon having practitioner experience of several years in order to get the certification. So again, the academic qualification will demonstrate something about the individual, that they were able to undertake a significant program of study, understanding and putting into practice the things to get them to that level. A professional certification tells you something else, and it tells you very much about their experience in the workplace, in some cases managing the provision.
Yeah. So if I was to say to you, let's design a new cybersecurity program, and you've got 5 building blocks that you would develop, what would your 5 building blocks for that program be?
Give me an example of what you have in mind by a building block.
Pen testing, cryptography, risk analysis, ethics, something like that.
Okay, so I mean, one thing I would particularly be interested in is around the software engineering and understanding how to design and develop the code in a secure way. So that encapsulating all of that aspect. I think there needs to be a clear understanding of risk and the, if you like, the policy management side, how security fits into the wider context and what risk and threat, etc., actually mean. Then, well, some of the others, it depends really what direction you want the security person to go into. So certain things like crypto could be interesting for some aspects. In other cases, the more, if you like, applying it to systems pen testing elements. So what I would want is a whole range of blocks, and I would apply the 5 differently depending on the type of output that I want to get.
And do you think that's fundamentally the problem that we have just now, that industry can't tell the difference between a law, ethics, risk output and a pen testing output?
Yeah, I think quite possibly. And I mean, if you look at a lot of the the job ads that are out there, particularly where they're asking for professional certifications, you see the list of certifications that they ask for, and they blah, 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 or similar. And then you look at that list and you think, well, actually the things that you've listed are not remotely similar to each other than the fact they are generally in the space of security. One will be a pen testing, ethical hacking type of certification. Another one will very much be an auditing thing. And you sort of think, well, you're not going to get the same person with each of these certifications. And so knowing what they need for a particular role and understanding, being able to map the underlying skills to that, I think is important.
Yeah. And then for it to become a profession, really citizens have got to trust the advice. So they've got to be able to go to a cybersecurity specialist and ask about encryption or phishing or something like that. We probably have a long way to go to get to that point, and certainly the medical profession, even engineering, has got to that point that we can trust an engineer to make sure that bridge won't fall down. Do you think the media themselves has maybe got a role to play in starting to pick off the professions that exist within cybersecurity to educate? So rather than just call someone a cybersecurity specialist, you say that this person understands risk analysis.
Yeah, I think certainly having some indications of what a professional would look like. So, for example, we have the Institute of Information Security Professionals, which I should add I'm a board member of, and we have different levels of membership which people will apply for based upon professional practice and professional interview, and we've now become a chartered institute, and so that's the beginnings of a body that in parallel to other disciplinaries, you can start to recognise as a profession with a recognised status.
Yeah, and we obviously have REF coming up in 2021 that we're all quite motivated about, or quite worried about. And REF is looking much more at impact. So obviously our papers, it's important that we publish, that we disseminate, and we disseminate at the highest level. But I think when it comes to impact, then that seems to be the area that many universities struggle in. What would be your advice for a young researcher in a university, an early career researcher? How would they go out and make impact? They're publishing well. What's that next step they need to take?
Well, I suppose one element of advice I would give is don't over-obsess on something like REF. Actually get on with the research that you believe is of value and that you have faith in, that you're doing it for a reason. Impact doesn't come instantly. It takes time for certain advances in the underlying science to be picked up and have the opportunity to show that they've caused impact. So initially what you might call, well, not so much impact, but recognition. It begins with the citations of the work by others, but the taking the ideas forward, seeing them actually develop into things that are affecting the practice could take a much longer time.
Yeah. And many academics struggle in the EPSRC form for the pathways to impact. It just is one area that we really struggle to actually see where our research would end up. So someone who's been in research for quite a while, what would your advice be in writing that Pathways to Impact?
Well, again, I've got no perfect answer to it, but I think it's thinking beyond what you're immediately going to find and how somebody might utilise that and how you might build around it. Again, it's going to depend particularly on what the project idea is and what the advancement is expected to be. But I suppose many academics, I guess, will sometimes find that difficult because they think very much in terms of commercial impact and how somebody might commercialise it. It's not necessarily that. It's how could it affect the society of users? How could it actually affect the way we use technology?
Yeah. And obviously innovation is becoming a core part of our economic development. We probably aren't punching above our weight or at any weight in terms of cybersecurity innovation. We're not possibly producing the high growth companies of the future in a way that a country like Israel would. What would your advice would be to politicians about how, and in Scotland, what would you say to them? Is it a matter of throwing money at some people with ideas? Should we be asking the big companies to help support the SMEs? Is it around innovation centres and so on? What would you see as a perfect ecosystem for going forward for innovation in cybersecurity?
Well, I certainly think more investment and support is not going to hurt the situation, but I think it's also signposting this as a direction that people, or, that society and that government wants people to enter, so that it's seen as a positive career path, that we get more people actively studying in that area, emerging as graduates. We've got a recognised skills shortage in cybersecurity, not only in the UK but internationally, and so we need that pipeline to grow, and as that grows, then the possibility to grow the associated investment and innovation can come as a consequence.
Yeah, that's excellent. And do you have any other observations that you would like to tell the world about?
Not immediately spring to mind. I suppose the underlying thing that always occurs to me is going back to the thing that we the people are the ones using the technology, we're the ones benefiting from it, but we're also the ones that ultimately can come to harm through it. And so we need to have that education awareness piece being pushed constantly to get us to a better level than we currently are. I think if you look at any of the surveys around, over decades worth of these surveys being done, you see very few organisations saying that they're doing things around education awareness. You see the same organisations citing the people as the problem, and it's not the people's fault. It's the fact those people haven't been supported, they don't know any better, and it's time we did better for them.
That's excellent. Well, thank you very much for the interview
Thank you.
and for your time. Thank you. Well,